Welcome everyone. This is Heather Riggs with the New England Museum Association. Welcome to our webinar this afternoon on accessibility in a post-COVID world. As you've noticed in the chat feature, we will be having closed captioning. So if you want the closed captioning, hit the button on the closed captioning on the bottom of your screen, and you will have the option to incorporate that into today's webinar. As always, our webinars are recorded and will be available on the NEMA website later this afternoon. So if you have to leave early or want to share this with your colleagues, that would be great. So check out the NEMA website underneath the conference and events, and there will be a link to our YouTube page on that one. So we have a bunch of stuff to go over today. It's going to be a fast hour. So I would like to turn it over to Stephen from Direct Access. Hi, to let them start the conversation on accessibility.
Okay, thank you for inviting us. So, to get this screen.
Yeah, I'm not very technically minded. Don't you? Right, okay, can you all see that screen? Right, okay, we should briefly cover the closed caption. I'll just go through it again. On the bottom of your bar, there should be a DC button. If you click on that, then the caption should appear.
And if you want this presentation in any other format, such as Braille or large print, please let us know. We'll try and facilitate that somehow. Okay.
Okay. Slight technical issues here. Then, this is director that's talking about disability in the post-COVID world. So, we should that this session had live captioning, and it will be recorded and displayed that all the PowerPoint presentation will be available after the event.
I'm Stephen. I established Direct Access in 2004. We're one of the leading access consultancies here in the UK. I personally am an access consultant for many museums, including World Heritage sites, such as the Roman Bath and the Houses of Parliament, also known as Palaces of Westminster. I've worked with refurbishment programs, such as the Preston Harris or Blackpool Winter Garden, all grade listed historical buildings. Also, I'm a consultant for 150 museums as part of the West Midlands UK Association.
My name is Steve. I joined Direct Access in 2017, so I've been here for just over 3 years. I did my master's in occupational safety and health, and my background has been around fire safety, health and safety, which does lead itself in some ways to accessibility. Shortly after I joined Direct Access, I moved out to Dubai, where I worked on the curation and programming for Expo 2020 for 2 years. It was quite an interesting experience because they brought in a new universal design standard in 2017, but because they had started designing Expo before then, a lot of it was to the ADA standard. I'm also part of the International Association for Disability Professionals, and what we're trying to do is encourage more new access consultants to join.
By the end of this session, the Power Hour, I hope that you will have a greater understanding of access audit, what they're about, the purpose, some examples, an action plan, how to implement it, the implications of COVID-19 and what you need to take into account in terms of accessibility, the purpose and how to create access guides. But before we go forward and talk about that, I want to talk very quickly about people who will benefit from inclusive museums. People with a physical impairment, vision impairment, hearing impairment, people who have neurodiversity issues, Families benefit from inclusive media. Elderly people, we live in an aging population. Temporary injury, people who play football, soccer. Pregnant mothers, people who are fatigued, tired. When you take into account this whole range of people, it is a significant number, a huge part of the population. So museums need to consider their accessibility across the whole spectrum of disability, not just those with a mobility impairment. It surprises me that a lot of people, service providers, think that accessibility is just about wheelchair users. It's not.
In the UK, we have the Equality Act, which came out in 2010. Although its legislation, it doesn't specify building standard, which is actually referenced in a separate document, which is standard 8,300, and also part M building regulation. So you have a separate legislation and separate standard, whereas in the United States, you have the ADA, which is actually 30 years old this year, so that's something to be celebrated. Building standards actually referenced right in within the ADA. And the defined person with disability, as Stephen said, is more than just a mobility impairment. But what's also useful for museums to be aware of is the Smithsonian produced a guide for their staff, but which they have actually made accessible for other people. It's based on the ADA and the Architectural Barriers Act and the Rehab Act. It's a useful resource that actually sets out what their standards are for accessible exhibition design, and that's something that we might find useful.
I want to talk about this one. Okay, as part of our work for Dubai Expo 2020, they wanted to make sure that their event exhibitions was really future-proof. So what we actually did, we created a benchmark report. So we got the ADA, Dubai Universal Design Code, and the Olympic standard,
and British standard.
Yeah, and the British standard, and we measured it against all the criteria. And what we found was that the ADA was really strong in several areas, such as the physical environment, but it was a little bit limited in terms of information on technology or materials in accessible format. And this is potentially because of the age of the ADA.
Yeah. So a big part of what we do is accessibility audit, and then what that involves is visiting established premises to have a look at where they are at the current moment in time and make recommendations based on the required standard. What comes out of the audit is an ongoing action plan to achieve facilities that will be inclusive for all. That could be by retrofitting or by providing services in alternative ways. So what he's audited, the physical aspect of the building or the environment, the needs of the building, including any alternative provision for access to premises and services, and any building management issues.
And you'd be amazed that one of the biggest issues to accessibility in nearly all the museums we've seen is building management issues. Quite often, a large part of the action plan will be down to building management, and that doesn't actually cost anything to do.
And I think you will be covering that later on with some examples. Perfect timing.
Okay, I'll jump in here. I thought it'd be quite good just to show some examples in access audit and what to look for. So when you undertake an access audit, you look at the whole building from the approach the entrance to reception, the circulation, all the way down to building management issues. Your museum, is it well signposted from the town? Do people know where it is? Do you have tactile paving on approach? The street furniture, is that colour contrasted? In terms of the ADA and the British Standard, accessible parking is more or less the same. Yours tend to be blue, ours tend to be yellow. I prefer the blue. However, what is the same is these need to be consistently remarked. It's not just a case of providing an accessible parking space and then forgetting about it. Ramp. It's quite often, a lot of people are surprised to hear that those with a mobility impairment actually prefer to negotiate step than a gradient. If you have ramp, do you have colour contrast? If you have handrails, are they of exposed metal? Because if they are extremely cold to touch. Step. Do they have colour contrast to the edge of the step? Is there handrail? Is there tactile paving at the top and top and base? And if you look at this picture is a very good reason of why you need to have colour contrast to the edge of the step. It's virtually impossible to see these steps. Entrances. Do people know where the entrance is? Do you have signage on approach to the entrance? Is the entrance colour contrasted? If you have fully glazed entrance, do you have markings at too height? Which is important because glass can be quite difficult to see. Reception areas, service areas, do you have an induction loop? If you have a lowered counter, is it kept clear, i.e. not used as a storage area where everything's on there? Gift shop in the reception area, is everything at a suitable height for wheelchair users? Doors, opening pressure, both the ADA and the British Standard require doors to have light open pressures of no more than 30 newtons. Colour contrast. Do you have any white doors on a white background? If you have impaired vision, it can be quite difficult to see. Personal favourite. Museums, art galleries, they quite often have wooden flooring. And one of the issues with wooden flooring is it can be quite shiny, and that can make a lot of people apprehensive because it looks like a wet surface, and also produces glare that can make it difficult to lip read. Columns, are they standing out? I have to include that here because we did some work with a museum in Poland, and this is actually the route to that museum, and you can see that the way they've done the floor makes it look like that it's a flight of steps. Here, step, do you have colour contrast to the edge of the nosing? If you look at the carpet one, they are black against a black background. And then, do you have open risers? And open risers, I don't know if that's a term you use over there, but that's when you have the gap underneath the step. That's not only a tripping hazard, it also makes assistant guide dog apprehensive because they can see through the gap, so they may not proceed. If you have a lift, do you have tactile and braille? Is the lighting good? Is the support rail colour contrasted? Do you have audio in the lift for people with impaired vision? Restroom facilities. Do you have centre tap, lever tap, which are easier for people with a dexterity impairment? Do you have colour contrast? Do you have grab rail to the urinal to help ambulant disabled people? Accessible restrooms. Again, building management, we always look at the cord alarm. Are they tied up? Quite often, people who clean the facility will tie it up, clean it, and then forget to untie it. Or if you have a school trip with lots of children, sometimes museum staff may tie the cord alarm up to stop them pulling it, but then forget to release it again. Quite often, a lot of people with autism can use accessible restrooms as a place for quiet and calm. As you can see, the toilet on the left had a really strong pattern on the floor. Have a look at these facilities.
And then one thing, if you do have a poll code, do you have someone actually on today?
That's a very good point, because in a lot of with a lot of pull cord alarms in accessible restrooms, it's just an external indicator. So a distract call can become isolated because nobody realizes or hears about it. Consider the accessibility of the facilities you provide in your museum. So for an example, if you have a play or interactive area, are they accessible for a range of users? Do you provide tactile information, seating with armrest? Wayfinding, we also look at large print for museum display. Do you have a tactile wayfinding map board? I will come to this in a minute because we are in strange times in a pandemic. Lighting. Lighting can make or break a museum. Glare, uplighted, downlighted, dark areas, bright areas, uneven lighting areas. These can all be extremely problematic for a range of people. Training room, meeting room. Do you have an induction loop for people with a hearing impairment? It is a requirement under the ADA that assisted listening devices be provided. Fire. Do you have visual flashing alarm? Now, people with a hearing impairment, like myself or Steve, we have a cochlear implant, so we can hear sound. However, when we're concentrating or enjoying a museum or something like that, sometimes our preference is to turn our hearing aids off, so we're not being distracted by noise, so we can focus. Building management. Again, restroom being used as a storage facility, cord alarm being tied up. You'd be amazed at how many access orders actually it's all about building management issues. And because staff are working in the museum all the time, sometimes they don't see that. Sometimes you need an external person to come in and go, have a look. For an example, if somebody came to my house and said, Stephen, do you actually have a messy house? I'd be like, no, I don't. Oh, yeah, you're right, I do. Sometimes you need that person to tell you.
Thank you, Stephen. The one thing you've done on audit is probably going to be very comprehensive. So what do you do with that? This is where the action plan comes in, and you can actually prioritise that. Here in the UK, what we do with action plans is that we use them to help keep the focus on what we want to achieve. Quick wins should be immediately implemented, because quite often there could be a management procedure that doesn't cost anything. Stephen and I go on and on about alarm code, but that is just something they've been told. Just train your cleaning team to not tie them up or to let them down after they clean. So that is the quick win. Then there are long-term items which should be considered as part of future refurbishment. And then there will be many items which might not be your responsibility. For example, you might have local or state government that's responsible for the way that approach your site. So any aspect issues would be their responsibility. The aspect audit action plan that we create normally have a colour traffic light system, so red, amber and green. And they also have estimated cost. What we need is N for none, such as the management procedure. M is minimal, which might be $5, $10 item. OG would be ongoing maintenance, and ST would be a structural change. For example, if you've got depth, perhaps removing that and installing combined depth and ramp, which would obviously be quite a significant investment. And then the colours are based on the different priorities. So priority in red would be the immediate one that needs to be changed, and then the green one could be longer term. So you can create an action plan that actually suits your budget and the sort of time scale that you're looking for, whenever it's from 12 months to 5 years. We encourage our clients to be proactive and not reactive. What we mean by that is that we encourage them to frequently review the action plan. This helps them to illustrate that they are a proactive service provider. Achieving inclusion is not something that can be achieved overnight. An action plan illustrates the start and an ongoing journey to actually achieve a conclusion.
I'd just like to add that it's a good idea to undertake frequent access audit to your premises because it allows you to see the facility that you provide through the eyes of a disabled person. Okay, right, COVID-19. Wow, I have been an access consultant for over 20 years. And all the books I've read, everything I've seen on the internet, there is no rule book for what we're going through at the moment. And I got so many museums approaching me and saying, what do we do? How do we do this? And to be honest, sometimes I'm like, I don't know. But because nobody can prepare for what we're going through at the moment. But we are going to have to get there, and give you a little bit about where we are in the UK with COVID. Here in the UK, the museums have been locked down since March. Some have started to reopen in July. Some plan to reopen in September or even 2021 next year. We've had face masks, surgical masks, however you want to call them. They became mandatory for all museum visitors in the UK since England, since Saturday, August the 8th, except for those with a disability. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, they all have their own different agenda because they're governed differently. I thought it would be quite good to give a few tips, some of the things we picked up amongst our museum clients here in the UK. If some of your restrooms are closed for hygiene reasons or to make it easier to manage the COVID-19, for example, if you have a one-way system in place, try and keep an accessible restroom open, or potentially make an accessible restroom available on request. The reason I've said that is because one of the museums we've worked with, they have, I think, about 15 restrooms and maybe 2 accessible restrooms. But because of the one-way system, they actually closed the accessible restroom. So it's important to have a think about that. Hand sanitizer. I don't think my hands have ever been this clean in my life. Seriously, I'm not joking. Every 30 minutes, hand sanitizer, hand sanitizer, hand sanitizer. So that then brings museums to providing hand sanitizer. These, according to the ADA, should not be more than 44 inches. Now, the ADA doesn't state hand sanitizer, but it's stating how high things should be, so that's our interpretation of it. And in the UK, it's 1200, we use metric. Also make sure that the hand sanitizers don't protrude into root. For example, some sites we've been to, they place the hand sanitizer in the middle of an access route, which causes issues for people with impaired vision. It causes maneuverability issues for wheelchair users. Hand sanitizers, you'd be amazed at how many are white seen against a white background. So many people just walk straight past them because they don't see it. And you've got to remember that in a museum, there is a lot of sensory overload going on. So you're pretty much concentrating on going ahead. You're excited to go and see something. So these hand sanitizers, they really need to stand out. And actually the Smithsonian recommends a solid contrasting colour between item and the background. So that concurs with what I'm saying. COVID, text green. As somebody with a hearing impairment, it's actually, I've found that accessibility has regressed quite a lot, because now a lot of reception decks, service deck, gift shop deck, they put a perspex green in front. This causes a problem for people with a hearing impairment in terms of glare. A lot of these screens have a lot of glare, which makes it very difficult to lip read.
If you have a look at the picture on the bottom of the screen, that is a very good example where there is a lot of glare.
And also, the microphones of a hearing aid require direct sound. So when you have a screen in front, the sound is sort of going up and then back down. But the hearing aid microphones are focusing straight on. So we can't lip read and we can't hear at the same time. So how do we encounter that? By making sure we have an induction loop, an assisted listening device, and also try and make the staff aware that if there's somebody with a hearing impairment, to perhaps just speak to them to one side or provide a gap through the screen. Important to note that the same as here in the UK, the Equality Act and also the ADA, it's important that it's law, yeah, it's morally right to do that. However, health and safety does take precedence over both the ADA and the Equality Act. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try and be accessible. As I said earlier, there is no rule book at the moment for tactile map and object. I think there's going to be an increased use of audio guides and app to help navigation.
But then if you have a visitor who is deaf and blind, they would not be able to use an audio guide for obviously. One possible option is did you have a printed paper tactile map that you should give to them for them to navigate, which is not the same as the tactile map that most museums would have on the wall that if you visitor would have in touch.
In fact, one of our clients, the Roman Bath, World Heritage Site, they have lots of tactile map boards for people with impaired vision, blind. What they've had to do is close those off because they're very tactile. You touch them, and children touch them as well. So they closed those off and they provided paper tactile map as a precaution. And in fact, one of our railway customers, they as well are banning the use of tactile map board and issuing paper tactile map. Another thing that's important is that a lot of museums have accessible features. For instance, here you have the head of Minerva, which is an object that you can touch, and it enables people with impaired vision to visualize in their head what the object looks like. This is one example, an accessible feature. If you are closing off some of these accessible features in terms of hygiene temporarily, make sure that you put that on your website, because what I've found is that some museums have closed sections which have the most accessible features that people are looking forward to visit, to go and visit and then be disappointed that it's not available.
As the deaf person who normally relied on sign language for communication, what I normally do is I think nothing is going 250 miles to a sign language performance. So if I turn up and they cancelled it, but they've not told me that they're a 500 mile round trip.
And I found that many sites have changed their opening hours. So somebody with a hearing impairment may book a personal interpreter to go with them to find that the site, museum or gallery is actually closed. So it's really important to make sure that the website is updated. Due to this pandemic, I think we killed a lot of trees, cut down a lot of forests, because we're really churning out all this temporary signage at the moment. Do not go here, one-way system, hand sanitizer here, toilet this way, do not use this toilet. What I'm seeing is that a lot of these temporary signs are not following best practice guidelines, and this includes making sure that your signage is in upper and lower case. Make sure you have an accessible font, such as sans serif or Arial. Don't use Times New Roman. Make sure that the signage is pictorial. And the reason I say that is because you have a lot of people who English is not the first spoken language, and people who do sign language, actually text and English might not be their language. Make sure that the temporary signs are well contrasted, black on a white background or black on a cream background. I've been to some places where you have beige letters on cream paper, it doesn't stand out.
David Dog, I'm just focusing on guide dogs for the blind because one of the issues is that a guide dog has been trained to escort the owner straight to the entrance. Because the owner had a visual impairment, they will not be able to see or understand about social distancing, and the dog has not been trained to wait in a queue. So it's useful to be aware that if someone comes with a guide dog, how that is handled, so that they know about social distancing. I mean, David dogs are David animals under Title 2 and 3 of the ADA. If you have a David dog, perhaps for a deaf person or some other disability, they will visually be able to should be that they need to maintain social distancing and should be okay, though it should someone with visual impairment. That's what we need to be aware of.
Absolutely.
If there's a one-way system is introduced that changes an death rate, then the policy must be developed to facilitate disabled access. So sometimes you have a site where you have a main entrance and then you have a accessible entrance around the side. But what's been happening in some places is if they change it, so that accessible entrance actually becomes the way out. So you need to work out how do you coordinate people going in that way. You must be clearly designed for non-verbal visitors. You may have difficulty asking for direction, and that applies both inside and outside. Any changes should be detailed on your website.
That's critical.
Yeah, particularly for people with autism who might have been changes challenging, particularly if they are new to coming to your site. For example, maybe every Monday morning, and then if all of a sudden there's a change and they've not been prepared for that. Masks can create challenges for deaf and hard of hearing visitors. Consider clear masks. Stephen demonstrated it, and this is a photo of another colleague, which is an example of a clear mask. There are different versions you can get, but that could be useful for like letting people face shield, which some people do need. At the current, as of yesterday, when I double check, the CDC, which is Centre for Disease Control, that they do not recommend face shield because they don't provide the right protection. What we do recommend is that you try written communication. So if you don't have a clear mask, try written communication or a phone app. Dr. Diver or Ottawa, but there are a lot more than just those two to try different apps to see what works best for you.
But as a deaf person, what I find most helpful is having people, staff members who are aware of the requirements of deaf people and training your staff and letting them know that there might actually be some deaf visitors to your museum. They will require additional need.
Very much so. If a visitor refuses to wear a mask, organisation can ask, are you unable to wear a mask because of disability? If yes, engage the individual to identify an alternative method of service. So, for example, if you have a museum with a coffee shop, perhaps you've got outside seating, maybe the person can sit there while you go inside and fetch a drink or food, which would be an alternative method of service.
And I'd just like to say, probably a lot of people watching that probably think, I can't ask somebody that, you know, but actually, no, generally, disabled people really appreciate being asked. How can we help you? How can we make this experience better for you? If somebody asks me, you know, how can we help you? I really appreciate it personally.
The most accessible venue in the world is no good if people do not know it is accessible. People with disabilities plan visit. Are there restrooms? Can I communicate with staff? Or are there quiet periods? EDF guys should have a lot of advanced information. Accessibility for wheelchairs, such as where is the ramp located, or perhaps the gradient. What facilities are there for those with hearing impairment? So that could be captioned, open, closed, hearing induction lead, or sign language interpretation. Facilities for those with vision impairment, general information, detailed about noisy and busy areas, doctor shops and cafes, quieter time to visit. Perhaps you have an autism hour specifically for visitors with autism, detailed about parking entrances and exits, and locations of restrooms. These are the UK figures. They should bear with me with this one. 54% of people with access requirement avoid going to new places if they cannot. find information about a disability. 63% of businesses do not promote their provision for those with access requirement. What that means is that a lot of potential visitors are missed. We have a globally Asian population. Those with access requirement are likely to represent a larger section of your potential customer base. In the UK, between 2006 and 2015, there was a 31% uplift in the number of domestic trips by people over 55. So an accessibility guide will help to future-proof the venue. So these are the UK figures. I did a little bit of research just for you, and these are some of the American figures. On the bottom left, the appropriate percentage of US families that have at least one member with a disability is 30%. There's approximately 10% of US families with at least one child with a disability. And at least 30% of veterans have a disability, though that is quite a big proportion of the US population, so about 19%. EDF guides should be updated and reviewed frequently, including temporary changes.
Such as the pandemic.
Precisely. They should have fresh photos. They should indicate if areas are being refurbished. And whenever staff have had any disability awareness training and or American Sign Language training. Whenever there is any information in audio, American Sign Language and large print, and these should be downloadable from your website. There should be different formats, a standard guide, an American Sign Language guide. On the bottom of the screen is a screenshot of a video produced by one of our colleagues in Sign Language. Then you can have a black and white guide that you can see on the top, or cream for someone with dyslexia, or large print, which would normally be 0.16 font, or audio description.
If you don't want to sit and record an access guide, you can actually, there's a lot of programs, a lot of apps where you can just upload a document and it will just provide all the spoken language for you.
What is really useful to be aware of is that if you created an access guide in a PDF format, that make sure you select alternative text for all of the images and put a description. So taking this for example, it would be a house with leaves on the ground and the stone in the front. The reason for that is that if someone is reading your access guide with a screen reader, the screen reader will be able to explain what the photograph is about.
Okay, we have 16 minutes left, so I want to spend the next 5 minutes quickly providing some basic tips and then potentially questions. Okay. Some of these tips are really outside of a pandemic world. So if you have artifacts or significant pieces in your museum, consider building a 3D model of the object to allow visitors to feel and explore. And actually, touch toys work for everyone and are very popular, particularly for children. My two children, they touch everything, which is probably not a good thing at the moment. If you have interactive games or fabric or things that you can touch and feel, make sure that they are on a table where a wheelchair user can go underneath, because if you imagine this table here didn't have the underneath bit, it'd be wheelchair. Lighting, a lot of problems we have in historical places, for instance, lighting can not be recommended because you need to conserve items. For an example, the Roman bath, the head of Minerva, you can't have constant bright light on it, so it has to be dark. This causes a problem for people with impaired vision. So one way to encounter that is have a switch that allows a bright light for 20-30 seconds and then it goes dark again. Provide self-guided tour, provide a large printed guide in a spiral-bound booklet. This will explain a journey that a visitor makes and the exhibit and displays that a visitor can see. Really helpful. Autism, people who have additional needs, neurodiversity. Consider advising when your museum had a quiet period. Consider providing an area where there's a quiet space to relax. An empty meeting room can provide that. You may need to provide your lighting and audio levels in this area. Another thing that we did for one of our other clients, a fast food chain of all places, but it's a good concept, which is actually provide recordings of your museum during busy period and put that up on your website. That allows somebody with autism to listen and prepare for what they're going to face when they arrive. Induction loop is a requirement in the ADA, yeah, but there's no point in just installing it and then hoping for the best. Make sure we've got signage stating that the facility is available. Make sure the staff actually know what this is for, because you will find that if staff members know what a piece of equipment is for, they will be more excited and more proactive in using it. Have a look at all the information your venue has, from leaflets to signage. Are audio versions of your leaflets available? Do you have large print versions of menus in your cafe? Do you have large print of the items you're selling in a gift shop? Is there an ASL video that welcomes visitors to your museum and tells them what to expect? Finally, promote. Accessibility and accessible facilities are not much used if you don't tell people about them. 95% of people with a disability will search for information about your accessibility online before visiting for the first time. Does your venue have information available about its disabled access? After the pandemic, when we can fly everywhere, I plan to make another visit to the US because we started working with a few organisations out there. We'd be delighted to meet and come and talk to you about your accessibility. When that happens, I don't know.
No, could be a couple of years yet, but from both of us, thank you very much for letting us be part of the part hour, which is on screen is our email address and the LinkedIn for both of us. So please do feel free to drop us an email or to connect on LinkedIn. I think we have about 10-11 minutes. So what we would do is that we stop the slideshow and then we'll hand back over to Heather and have some questions. I think.
I don't know what's going on here.
I don't know.
You're good. You're good. That was a lot of information in a short amount of time.
Oh, crikey.
You guys good?
Okay, go away.
No, we're still here.
Okay, we're here.
Okay. Hello again.
Hi. So I had a question come in. Can you explain what an induction loop is?
Yeah, absolutely. An induction loop, what that does, it helps people who wear hearing aids get more clarity. So if you take a hearing aid, yeah, the microphone on that is tiny. Mm-hmm. So it's limited in terms of technology. So a microphone on something, a hearing aid that small, amplifies everything, so you get a lot of background noise. So what an induction loop does is it says, hey, let me do the work. So then you put a switch on the hearing aid, it cuts the microphone, and then relies on the induction loop microphone and picks that sound up via a radio frequency. So it eliminates background noise, basically.
Sounds like a very good thing. So since you guys can't fly for a little while, are there any resources here in the US for people that would be able to do accessibility audits?
I'm waiting for the caption.
If you go down to the Q&A, it will pop up.
We have a network of people who specialize in doing accessibility out in the US. That's fine. That's one of the reasons why I've been flying out there and meeting these consultants.
Mm-hmm.
So the answer to your question is yes. However, we would love to come over ourselves, basically because one of the reasons, extra value of that, is because we've seen sites throughout the whole world, Dubai, England, Poland, France, Spain, US. We're able to make recommendations which will future-proof the venue. Yeah.
Yep. I did have a question, a follow-up to the induction loop. Where should they be placed? Like at the admissions, in the gift shop?
Right, okay. Do you want to answer this?
Yeah, the main one will be the welcome, where people arrive, the gift shop, but also if you've got any lecture hall, or perhaps a classroom, but then if you have 3 or 4 classrooms, you may not need one in each one, you might just need one in one room, and then we allocate according the group according to if they need the system.
Yeah, and also video shows. Video shows need an induction loop. People who are giving guided tours, walking around, they need to have a portable induction loop. So
how that would work is that they would have a microphone that they can clip, and then depending on the unit, either the deaf person will have an aid that they plug in, or they can adjust their setting depending on what model.
Yeah, an access order will actually highlight where the induction loops need to go. Okay, one of the issues we found that if you go to an induction loop company, it's in their best interest to sell you as much as you need, you know. So whereas if you get an independent access order, they will tell you what you require and not go over that. I'd just like to just quickly say, in terms of background noise, if you don't have an induction loop at a ticket deck, you can hear it's really loud. Children screaming, the hard floor, the tannoy, people shuffling, people taking coats on and off, and then the person actually in front of you is dead quiet. So the induction loop would then amplify the person in front of you and cut everything else out. Yeah.
Okay.
So how long does a typical audit take? Knowing that there's definitely variations in size of institutions.
How long the piece of string? It all depends on the building. If you have a small museum that is one room, then perhaps there's no car park, then that could be an hour. Or if you have a big big museum with maybe 20 rooms, that could take a day or a couple of days. It all depends on the size.
Yeah, one of the things we're doing in the US is we're talking to transport, we're talking to retail, we're talking to a lot of organisations out in the US. And what they are doing is they are batching a lot of buildings together. So we do a tour and then we do a lot and then come away and write all the report. But again, Stephen is right. A small museum may just take a couple of hours. The large National Gallery could take a day. It all depends on the site. And it's not just about how big the museum is, it's about how old the museum is. Mm-hmm. You could have a really historical building that could take 2-3 times as long as a modern building that's 3 times the size.
Yeah. Of course, one of the big challenges in the UK is that we have a lot of grade listed buildings. What that means is that we cannot touch the fabric of the building. Mm-hmm. If there's like steps, for example, you can't just say that, you need to build a show. That might not be possible. They really have to be quite creative, and sometimes that takes time. And it might be a good idea to engage with the local people with disability community, because you might have to say, right, we can't do this because of how old the building is. But we got this option and that option, which would you prefer? And by engaging with local communities that way, you end up with a building that meets what they think would be a good compromise.
I always, whenever I work with museums, art galleries, you name it, I always like to involve the local community because they are frequent visitors to the museum. So it's always good to hear what they would like out of the experience. Yeah.
Yep, definitely, especially in New England, we have a lot of inaccessible sites because they are historic. I've definitely noticed that going through them. So Hannah Goodwin mentioned in the chat feature, in Boston, there is an Institute for Human-Centered Design, which is the region's ADA center. There's also the Massachusetts Cultural Council has an UP program, which is really great. And we had a webinar about website accessibility, and it was someone that went through the UP program. So that's actually a really great one. So thank you for Hannah for suggesting that one there. And then we have another question about the induction loop. Is it more effective than assistive living listening devices for visitors with hearing loss or hearing aids?
I didn't get that because the caption haven't come up.
It's in the Q&A.
Let me I'll slide it out again.
I can answer that. Yeah. Basically, an induction loop is an assistive listening device. The terminology here. The amplification of sound is not what we're after. What we're after is clarity. So an induction loop is all about radio frequency. Now, I think there's a misinterpretation here of what an assistive listening device is. For some people, an assistive listening device could just be a microphone amplifying the sound. And that's not what we're after. An induction loop, which is also known as an assistive listening device, is one that had a radio frequency capability to speak directly to a hearing aid.
Sometimes it's also known as the hearing enhancement system.
Yes.
Different terminology.
Yeah.
I can see that someone had asked to repeat or show the slide again, or beneficial feature. The entire slide deck will be available, the whole PowerPoint, so we will get that shared.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, we are at our 2 o'clock hour. I know we had some great questions. If anybody does have follow-up questions for Stephen, their information is available on the website, and I will make sure that the slide deck is open later for everybody to look at. And I would like to thank both of you for staying late tonight, because it's definitely after hours there in the UK. So I do appreciate that one. Yeah, it's supper time. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing everybody at a future NEMO webinar or town hall. And I should say that this was actually one of our session proposals for our annual conference. So I am happy that they were able to modify it and make this presentation to everybody today through a webinar. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Stephen. Make sure you hang out a little bit to read the chat. There's a lot of really great things that people have been saying.
I'd like to say thank you very much for the opportunity to do that. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to email us. We don't bite. But if you email us in the next hour or two, we won't reply because we're going to bed.
Yeah, it's late there for you guys. So thank you, everybody, and I will see you at a future webinar. Bye.
Bye.
Thank